Okay, so it's time to pit the world's most popular 8-bit video game system against the world's most popular 8-bit computer and see which games that appear on both systems that I prefer. Now, the NES has a few advantages over the Commodore 64. First of all, every NES game comes on fast-loading cartridges where most Commodore games are on slow-loading discs. Also, every NES game uses the same multi-button controller, so there's no guessing if the game needs to use the keyboard in order to play it. And lastly, the NES's hardware is a bit better than the Commodore in terms of speed, graphics, and sprite abilities. Of course, that sounds like the NES is just gonna win every time, but hey, let's find out, starting with Ballblazer. I think this is LucasArts' first game. Well, maybe it's Rescue on Fractalus, I'm not sure. But anyway, this is a futuristic soccer game where you play as a rotofoil, trying to get the plasmorb into your opponent's goal. Pretty basic, pretty simple, and it really does not work very well on the Nintendo Entertainment System. If it had a bitmap display, it might work a lot better, but because it's a tile-based system, this game is just slow and ugly, and the sound is terrible. This is probably the worst version of Ballblazer that I've ever seen or even heard of. Now, the Commodore version, on the other hand, is fantastic. The graphics are smooth and fast, and it just plays really, really well. Not to mention the fact that the SID chip does an amazing job of playing music and sound effects. Now, I grew up playing the Atari 7800 version of Ballblazer, and I think that is the best version ever, but this Commodore 64 version is really good as well. The only thing I would say is that the difficulty level is really, really high on it. I put it on droid number 2 or 3, and I could barely, I don't even think I scored a goal. But either way, if I had to choose between Ballblazer on the Nintendo or Ballblazer on the Commodore 64, yeah, I'm gonna go Commodore 64 all day long. Our next game is Blades of Steel, and this is my #1 favorite hockey game of all time. It's just a blast to play. It's fast, the graphics are very detailed, the music is good, and it's very easy to control. You can pass the puck or you can shoot the puck. Those are the two things that you need to do in the game. Now let's take a look at the Commodore 64 version, and it's pretty good. The resolution isn't nearly as high as it is on the NES, but the presentation is pretty much the same. But it does feel a little bit slower, and the control of your players is good, but the ability to pass and shoot is a little bit hampered because you only have the one button on the joystick. So which one would I choose? Well, the Commodore version is pretty good, but ultimately the NES game is just miles better. Next up is Burgertime, the arcade classic game, and it's one of my all-time favorites. The graphics here in the NES game are pretty close to the arcade, although I've always been bothered by the fact that there's green stuff on the meat. Ew, gross. All you need to do is walk over the objects and create hamburgers. I like to start at the top because if you knock down one of those parts of the burger, it will cascade down to all the rest of the parts, making it a little bit easier. Other than the green meat on the hamburgers, the graphics and sounds of the Nintendo game are very good. Now let's look at the Commodore 64 version of the game, and to me, this looks more like the Intellivision version than anything else. Also, I'm not sure if this is a homebrew game or not because there are multiple versions of Burgertime available for the Commodore. This one I really didn't care for too much. I mean, it doesn't even have music. Then we have this other version of Burgertime which does also look similar to the Intellivision game. Now this one is called Burgertime 97, but it just plays a lot better, it has music, and it's generally more fun. Controls are a little bit slippery. I mean, half the time I wanted to go up a ladder and he walked right past it. But otherwise, it's a pretty fun version of Burgertime. So which one will I pick? Well, again, the Nintendo version is just better than the Commodore one. Not to say that the Commodore game isn't fun, I'm just more apt to play the Nintendo version. Next we have Castelian, or Nebulus, or Tower Toppler, whatever they're calling it these days. It's all the same game. In this game, you play as a frog whose goal it is to reach the top of the tower so that he can eat his pizza. Because apparently it was stolen by a giant bouncing eyeball or something like that. I don't really know the point of this game other than getting to the top. As you can see, this game has some really interesting 3D style graphics. Well, I don't know if they're 3D or not, but they just look cool. The character graphics are a little bit plain, but you know, it's workable. Your character can shoot, and he can jump. Unfortunately, most of the stuff that you shoot doesn't really do anything, so, you know, the gun is almost pointless. Now let's take a look at the Commodore 64 version of the game, which is called Nebulus, and I think this is one of the original versions of this game, if I'm not mistaken. Now you'll have to forgive the glitchy graphics, that's going to be due to the emulator that I'm using. The graphics are really good and even include a starfield in the background. Now the one problem with this version of the game is that, again, you only have one button, and you use that button to both shoot and jump. So if you're just standing there, you shoot, but if you're moving, you jump. And that can be kind of tricky sometimes. But if I had to pick between the Nintendo and the Commodore 64 versions of this game, I think I would go with the Commodore game. I think it's better. Next we have Choplifter, and this is the version that appeared on the Famicom. In this game, your job is to fly a helicopter behind enemy lines to rescue prisoners. You can shoot at tanks and planes and turrets and jeeps and all kinds of stuff. Just don't shoot the prisoners. This game is pretty good. It's got some nice graphics to it, and it also controls well. The sound of music is a little, I don't know, bland, I guess. But it is nice that there are different stages if you can get far enough. Now the Commodore version of the game, I think, may have been one of the original versions. Although I could be wrong, it may have appeared on the Apple II first. Now in this game, you're rescuing prisoners at night versus in the broad daylight, which, I don't know, actually might be a better idea. This one, again, is a little tricky to control because of the one-button limitation. There are a couple of things that did bother me, though. One is that I could never shoot one of the tanks. I tried for a really long time, and it just never blew up. The other thing is, after I rescued my first set of prisoners, the jet would always fly in and blow me up, like almost instantly. So I couldn't really get too far in this game. So between these two games, I think the Famicom game is better. Commando is our next game, and it is a glitchy mess on the Nintendo Entertainment System. You play as Super Joe on a mission to a department store to buy gifts for his family. Unfortunately, he's being impeded by many soldiers for some reason. Along the way, you can find other people who have been lost on their quest to find gifts and save them from having to ever buy them again. I mean, come on, you've seen this game before, right? Basically, shoot the enemies and rescue the prisoners. You have weapons like grenades and guns and machine guns and, I don't know, I think knives too. I think you have a knife. I think there's a knife in the game. No doubt that was a gift from the wife. This game is a bit glitchy, but fortunately the graphics do look nice and it plays well. Also, the music is pretty good too. The Commodore version of the game is really good. It does feel a little bit zoomed in though, I think primarily because the resolution is just not as high on the Commodore. The music is good, but it's a little warbly and somewhat too loud for me. Fortunately, the graphics are not glitchy like the Nintendo game is. So which one would I rather play? Well, the Commodore game is good, it plays fast and it looks good, but I think I would still go with the NES game, despite the glitchiness. Alright, let's talk about Die Hard. In Die Hard, your goal is to find the Nakatomi Plaza Christmas party because you've completely got separated from your wife and everybody else in the game. And on that journey to the Christmas party, you've encountered a lot of bad guys trying to steal money. The music is good, and I feel like it really helps the tension of the game. The graphics are pretty interesting in this game. I like how you have these blind spots as you walk around. And aside from the really lame character animation, I think this is a pretty decent game. Now the Commodore version, on the other hand, is almost completely different. It's more of a side-scrolling action game. And I really like this style of graphics. It's kind of like a 3D perspective kind of view. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to figure out how to fight these guys or shoot them or anything like that. I think I shot all my bullets a little bit too early. Also, I think the emulation might be just a little bit glitchy here. Also, there's no music, which, I don't know, could be a good thing. So which one would I rather play? Well, I'm more likely to pick a side-scrolling action game like this versus a top-down game, and the style of the Commodore game is just really piqued my interest. So yeah, I think I would like to play the Commodore game, if I can figure out what I'm doing. Here's Donkey Kong for the Nintendo Entertainment System, which is basically the game that saved Nintendo. I mean, imagine if this game had been a failure. We would not have Nintendo today, that's for sure. But this version of the game is, pretty much arcade perfect, aside from one slight problem. It only has 3 screens. This one does not include the cement factory, which I hate that they always leave that one out. That's such a fun level. So yeah, sounds, graphics, music, control, it's all perfect in this version of the game. Oh, and let me highlight the fact that Nintendo has retconned the name Mario into Jumpman, so it's okay to say that this is Mario in Donkey Kong, but Jumpman will also work. So on the Commodore, I have 3 different versions of Donkey Kong to show you. This first one, Mario looks like Mario, Donkey Kong looks like Donkey Kong, but the platforms look a little bit flat. Also, the game plays really slow. Then we have this second version of Donkey Kong, where I think the platforms look a little bit better and the game plays a little bit faster. This one also includes all 4 stages. Now we have this third version of Donkey Kong where the characters look nothing like they're supposed to. Mario and Donkey Kong look totally different. Also, the Rivet stage is green instead of blue. I don't get that. So anyway, all 3 of these Commodore versions of Donkey Kong are good, but ultimately they're just not as good as the arcade perfect Nintendo Entertainment System version. Double Dragon is our next game, and it is an arcade conversion, naturally. I mean, obviously you know what Double Dragon is by now, I would think. I feel like the Nintendo game is really good, despite the limitations. Yeah, I mean, it's only single player, and you can only have the same enemy on the screen at once, and you don't have all your moves right up front, but still, I feel like the graphics, the sounds, and the gameplay in this version of Double Dragon are just top-notch. Now there are 2 versions for the Commodore 64, and honestly, they both stink. In this first one, I can barely even punch or kick or do anything. These guys just beat me up in 2 seconds before I can even move. The graphics are kind of detailed, but I don't know, the color choices just look really odd. Then we have this other version of Double Dragon, which is a little bit better. The graphics look better and the gameplay is just a little bit better as well. But again, only having one button really hampers your ability to fight these guys. So it's a little question which game I would play. The Nintendo game is just better. Our next game is Elevator Action. And the goal here is to infiltrate this building, collect the plans, and escape the building, all while avoiding enemy agents. The Nintendo version really does match the arcade's graphics, sounds, and gameplay, and I've always found this game just really highly enjoyable. I especially like shooting out the lamps and watching them crash down on the agents, or I'm always trying to like crush the agents in the elevator too. Doesn't always work though. They don't like getting under the elevators for some reason. I don't know why. So the Commodore version of the game really looks nothing like the arcade. The graphics are extremely blocky. I had to zoom it in here just so that it would fill the screen. Control is okay, I guess, but there are two big problems with this game. Number one, you cannot duck under the enemy bullets, and number two, if you get hit, that's it. You have to start all the way over again, and that really sucks. And those two obvious oversights just make me think that maybe this is a prototype game or a homebrew game. I'm not really sure. But in any case, the Nintendo version is just miles ahead of the Commodore game. Next we have Gauntlet, the classic Atari Games arcade game, which was expanded quite a bit on the Nintendo. I mean, normally you're just traveling from maze to maze, collecting treasure and shooting enemies and trying to find the exit, but in this one, I think you're trying to stop this evil character, Morlock or something like that. Forgive me, I don't remember his name. But you still have all four characters, the Valkyrie, the Wizard, the Brute, and the Elf. The character graphics can be a little bit plain, but it's not too bad. Also, the music and sounds are just really fantastic. This might be my all-time favorite home conversion of Gauntlet. So how does it look on the Commodore 64? Well, I don't know, I think the character graphics look a little bit more detailed. But the ground is just, completely gray, just one big huge slab of concrete, I guess. They couldn't, create like stone tiles or something like that back then, I don't know. Now this one is a little bit closer to the arcade game in terms of what you do. Just travel from stage to stage, collecting gold and destroying enemies. The control is nice and the scrolling is good. So yeah, I'd say this is a good version of Gauntlet. Now, would I rather play this over the Nintendo version of the game? Well, no. I mean, I don't think there's any home version of Gauntlet that I would rather play than the Nintendo version. Alright, so Ghostbusters is our next game, and as you probably know, the Nintendo version is just one of the worst games on the system. The graphics are terrible, the sounds are terrible, the music is repetitive and terrible, the gameplay is, well, terrible, and generally this game isn't really much fun. So going into the Commodore game, I was expecting to be very disappointed, but it turns out this game is actually good. So the Commodore version is the original game, and I'm a little upset that the Nintendo version is just so awful. Now you'll have to forgive some of the glitchy graphics here on the car. I think that's just an emulator problem. But pretty much all around, the Commodore version is better. The shop is much cooler because you can see your little forklift dropping off stuff. Moving around the screen is nice because it shows you where you've been.
He slimed me!
The car driving stage is much better because you don't have to worry about crashing into other cars. And the stage where you have to capture the ghost is just much more interesting to look at. So let's be honest here, neither one of these Ghostbusters games are fantastic, but if I had to pick one or the other, obviously the Commodore game is just way better than the Nintendo game. Our next game is Ghosts and Goblins, and apparently in this game your goal is to run around a cemetery in your underwear. And because you're running around in your underwear, naturally, you know, the evil zombies will appear, and, you know, and weird giant plants and wizards and demons and birds and everything. They're all trying to get you to put your clothes back on. I mean, come on. But truthfully, this is a game based on an arcade game from Capcom, and the NES version has some really nice graphics, sound, and music. It's also incredibly difficult to play, and it's one of my least favorite games, honestly, because of that. Now, the Commodore version is similar in gameplay, but the graphics are quite a bit more blocky. But it does have some really good music anyway. Control is kind of annoying, again, because we only have one button here to use, and if you want to climb up a ladder, you have to push up. Well, if you want to jump, you also have to push up. So half the time I jump when I'm trying to actually climb up the ladder, and that just makes the game that much harder. So I ended up turning on the trainer so I could see a little bit further into it. And to be honest, I don't see how anybody could get very far into this game because it's just so freaking hard. Anyway, I'm not a real big fan of any version of Ghosts and Goblins, so I don't know, I think I might pick the Commodore version here just because I can turn on the trainer and cheat my way through the whole game. But then again, doesn't the NES also have invincibility cheats with the Game Genie? Here's one of my all-time favorite games on the Nintendo Entertainment System, Gyrus. And of course, this is based on the arcade game from Konami, except that the NES game is way more expanded than the original. I mean, you still have to move your ship in a circle and shoot the enemy ships coming in, but you also have bosses to deal with, and you also have this super weapon thing that you can fire as well. This is definitely a great improvement on the original arcade game. Now, the Commodore version is by Parker Brothers, and it's basically just a straight conversion of the arcade. Your ship moves smoothly around the circle, which is good, and also the music is just fantastic. It really got me juiced up to play the game. Again, the graphics are a little bit blocky, but, you know, there's not a whole lot of them, so it doesn't really matter that much. The only thing I would say about the Commodore version is that it was extremely easy, and I don't think I turned on any trainers or switched it to easy mode. But if I had to pick between the two, well, I don't think I would. I like them both. I like that the Commodore version is arcade accurate, and I like the improvements on the NES version, so yeah, I like both these games. Next we have Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, which is kind of based on the original arcade game where you run around as Indy trying to save the children from Mola Ram in a cave. And you have different weapons besides your whip that you can use, like guns and bombs and knives and things like that. You also have to navigate a cart through the mine to escape, and that's pretty challenging. So yeah, the NES version is significantly different than the arcade, but it's, you know, it's an expanded version, so it's even better than the arcade, I guess. Now for the Commodore version, I think they were trying to make it like the arcade, but it just didn't quite work. Just maneuver around the caverns and save the children and escape in the mine car and try to get the Sankara stones. But Indy just does not quite look like Indy does in the arcade. Also, the mine car seems to travel in the wrong direction. I don't know, that bothers me just a little bit. I don't know why it goes left to right when it should go right to left. The music is a little loud and repetitive, and it could have been better. So which one would I rather play? I'm just gonna go with the NES version because I've been playing that since I was a kid and I've always loved it. The Commodore version is okay, it's just kind of slow and has some annoying music. It's the 2020s and there is still time for Klax! I've always loved this game, and it's basically Atari's take on the dropping piece puzzle genre. It's very simple, you just grab the tiles and you have to line 3 or more up, either horizontally, diagonally, or vertically. Some stages you have to get a number of points, some you have to survive a number of tiles, but hey, it's a good game, and the NES plays a respectable game of Klax. The Commodore version is decent, but it's also kind of lacking as well. The colors are not quite as vibrant, the music is not as good, the sound effects are annoying, but the background graphics are kind of nice, at least the one here with the trees. But the big problem with this version of Klax is the slippery controls. You have to be very, very careful when you're moving your paddle around, or you will overshoot your destination very quickly. So which one would I rather play? Well, the NES version is better, but truthfully, I'd rather play the Lynx version. That's the best one. Next is Marble Madness, the pseudo 3D marble rolling game from Atari Games. And honestly, I never thought that the NES could do this game, but it's surprisingly good. The music is nice, the graphics are very representative of the arcade. Controlling the marble is just never going to be as good with a control pad as it is with a trackball, that's for sure. But this one's got good music, sounds, and graphics, and it plays pretty well. It also loads very fast from the cartridge, which is a huge benefit over the Commodore 64 version. Alright, so let's take a look at the Commodore 64 version of the game, which is pretty good. Of course, the resolution isn't quite as good as the NES game, and in this case, you're kind of zoomed out from the screen instead of zoomed in, which is odd. The music is pretty irritating, to be honest. The big problem with the game is the controls. It's even more challenging to play than the Nintendo version is, and I was using the same controller here for both games. The other huge downside is the fact that there is a very long loading time. It's about, I don't know, about 20 seconds between screens. And I'm an impatient person. I want to get to the next stage while I'm hot, you know? So I feel like that loading time really ruins the flow of the game. So between the two games, yeah, the Nintendo version wins out again. It looks better, plays better, and it loads a lot faster. Next we have the original Mario Brothers. And in this game your goal is to clean the sewers of turtles and crabs and flies. And really I'm kind of surprised that nobody has hacked Mike Rowe into this game as Mario. You know, the guy who does the Dirty Jobs show? That would be pretty funny. But again, this is based on a classic arcade game, and the NES version is almost indistinguishable from the arcade game. It sounds just like it, plays just like it, looks just like it, controls just like it. This is one very accurate arcade-to-home conversion. Now let's take a look at the Commodore 64 version, which I think was created by Atari, strangely enough. And look at this, it's so very close to the arcade. I am extremely impressed. Now Mario himself looks a little off, but, you know, not bad. The control is good. I mean, it's nice that you only need one button for the game. The animation of the characters is also very good, and the sounds and music are also top-notch. One thing I did notice as a difference, other than the slightly different graphics, is the fact that when Mario hits the bottom of the platform doesn't bump upwards, it's just a static platform there. But that doesn't detract from the game. So which one would I pick? Well, the Nintendo version is very arcade accurate, but the Commodore version is also extremely good too. Here's Mighty Bombjack, which I think is a kind of sort of sequel to the original arcade Bombjack game. You're supposed to jump around and grab these, well, I guess they're cherry bombs. And you also have to avoid the enemies and collect the treasure chests. Graphics are kind of plain, the music is kind of tinny, and the control is a little wonky. I mean, I've never been able to figure out how to get the character to jump down faster. I think you have to hold down on the controller for that. It just never works right for me. Let's take a look at the Commodore version, and it's also very good. It's got some nice detailed graphics. I'm impressed that the background is detailed and not just a gray screen. The music and controls are also very good, but I still have that problem where I can't figure out how to jump down faster. Again, I think you have to push down on the controller or something. I don't think the colors are quite as vibrant in the Commodore game, but it still looks very comparable. So if I had to choose one game or the other, again, I think I'm going to go with the Nintendo game. I like the detailed graphics just a little bit better. Next we have Pac-Man, which is obviously a top 30 game because it appeared on the Nintendo NES Classic. In this game, obviously, you are a disembodied pizza, and you are trying to eat all the anchovies before the ghosts do so that you can serve them to your customers. I mean, it's Pac-Man, it looks like Pac-Man, plays like Pac-Man, sounds like Pac-Man. This is a good conversion, that's for sure. Now, the Commodore version was created by Atari, and honestly, it looks just like the 5200 and Atari 8-bit computer versions. I don't know if Atari was trying to make all of their games look the same or what, but they did. And I've never understood why Atari made the game all stretched out like that. I guess maybe they wanted to fill the screen and not have people ask, how come there's black bars on the left and right side of my game? So anyway, yeah, this is a good version of Pac-Man. It looks like Pac-Man, plays like Pac-Man. The ghosts don't have the white eyes, though. That's about the only downside besides the stretched playfield. The sounds are not quite like the arcade, but, you know, I can forgive that. So which game would I rather play? Well, I don't know, both. They're both really good versions of Pac-Man. The arcade classic Popeye is next on our list. And as you can see, the Nintendo version of the game is just about as close to the arcade as it gets. I mean, the graphics look exactly like the arcade game, as far as I can tell. The music is also fantastic, and the controls are just nigh on perfect. Of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that Popeye is the game that Nintendo wanted to do before Donkey Kong, but they couldn't get the license. Of course, after the huge success of Donkey Kong, King Features seemed to be a little bit more willing to allow Nintendo to make a game. Alright, so let's take a look at the Commodore version of Popeye, and I believe this one was by Parker Brothers, and I gotta say, it looks pretty dang good. The music isn't quite as rich, I think. I will say that Bluto, or Brutus, or whatever his name is, he's much more difficult in this Commodore version. It's almost as if he knows where you're going to be before you go there. Also, Popeye moves up and down the stairs just a little bit strangely. It's almost like you have to pass the step before you can actually start going up it. But overall, this is a pretty good version of Popeye. So which one would I rather play? Well, I think I'm going to go with the Nintendo version here, just because the graphics of the characters looks a little bit better, and when Popeye climbs the stairs, it just feels right, whereas the Commodore version just feels kind of weird. Next we have Q*bert, the classic cube stomping game. Basically in the game all you have to do is jump from cube to cube and change the colors. And also avoid the enemies. It's a pretty simple game, but you know, it's a lot of fun. The Nintendo version is very close to the arcade, that's for sure. And unlike Indiana Jones and Gyrus, there really are no special enhancements to the game. It's just your basic Q*bert, and that's not a bad thing because Q*bert is a really fun game. Alright, let's take a look at the Commodore 64 version, and as you can see, it looks just like Q*bert. It also plays just like Q*bert. And oh, it sounds just like Q*bert too. For some reason, the controls in the Commodore 64 version feel just a little bit more tight than the Nintendo game. Also, if you notice, Q*bert himself, he just looks right. The only thing that would have really been cool is if the Commodore game had voice. You know, like when Q*bert gets hit, he makes that kind of noise. So which one would I rather play? Well, you know, the fact that the Nintendo game is really just your basic Q*bert conversion with no special features added really helps the Commodore game in this case, because they're on a much more level playing field. I kind of feel like the Commodore game is better here. I really like the fact that Q*bert looks much more like the arcade Q*bert. Roadrunner is our next game, and it's based on the Atari Games arcade game that, honestly, I have never seen an actual Roadrunner game before. But I've always loved the Nintendo game. It looks so much like the cartoon. And the music is really good too. Basically, in the game, you play as the Roadrunner who is escaping from the coyote, who has a lot of crazy gadgets, who's trying to catch you and eat you, because apparently Roadrunner is pretty tasty out there in the desert, I guess. I think Wile E. Coyote is just extremely hungry. Somebody buy him a sandwich. But I love the graphics in this game. I mean, it looks just like the cartoon. Control is also excellent, which is really important in a game like this when you're trying to escape from a coyote. Alright, let's take a look at the Commodore 64 version of Roadrunner, and I have to apologize because I think the emulator has an issue with the game because it's like flickering and everything. I don't imagine the game does this on a real Commodore. But anyway, as you can see, it looks very, very good. The sounds are not quite as good as the Nintendo game in my opinion, but you know, they're okay. It does feel a little bit sluggish though, and again, I don't know if that's the fault of the emulator or the actual game itself. Lastly, let me mention the controls, which are good, except if you touch the sand, you get stuck almost every time. So trying to navigate some of these really narrow areas is almost impossible. And I feel like that just makes it a little unfair. Alright, so which game would I rather play? Well, I'd rather play the Nintendo game. The music is better, it's a little bit faster, and you don't get stuck in the sand. Next we have Robocop, which I thought might have been trying to base itself on the original arcade game, but it's quite a bit more featured than the arcade. You have different weapons and functions on your quest to find a bouquet of roses to bring home to your wife because, you know, it's your anniversary and Robocop, you know, he's kind of in the doghouse here. And it's really unfortunate because all these guys are trying to stop him from getting that bouquet. And these guys are just not romantic at all. Anyway, the graphics in Robocop are pretty nice for the Nintendo. Gameplay is okay, but, you know, honestly, I just wish it was more like the arcade game. The music is annoying and very repetitive. I just don't like it. Also, the control is a little strange. If you press diagonally down, he will shoot diagonally down. So you really have to push directly down in order to duck. Next we have the Commodore 64 version, which, the graphics just look like a huge mess, to be honest with you. Also, the sound is extremely warbly and annoying. Fortunately, there's not a lot of music in the game. Also, the controls are, I feel, really dodgy. Robocop looks so silly jumping when I just want to shoot upwards. It's too bad the Commodore joystick doesn't have two buttons. Another thing about the Commodore game is that it's just so hard, I can't get very far into it. I mean, these bullets are just coming from everywhere, and you don't get any extra lives, it's just one, and that's it. So, between these two Robocop games, I really don't want to play either of them. I'd much rather play the arcade game, but I don't know, I think the NES game is a little bit better. Smash TV is our next game, and it is based on the Williams Classic arcade game, which in turn is based on the Williams Classic game Robotron 2084. It's a twin-stick shooter, which if you use the second controller on the NES, you can actually replicate the arcade pretty closely. Well, I mean as close as you can get with a joypad.
Good luck! You all need it!
The graphics are a little bit plain. Honestly, I wish the backgrounds weren't brown. And the character sprites are very boring looking. Oh, and also the game is extremely repetitive because you just seem to be shooting the same grunts over and over again. It's not a terrible version of Smash TV, but there's much better versions out there. Speaking of which, let's talk about the Commodore version. And as you can see right off the bat, the graphics are quite a bit more detailed. Movement is good and fast. This might have twin stick capabilities, I'm not really sure, I didn't test that. But other than that, your character moves nice and smoothly, which is very nice, and it seems to have a much wider range of enemies to battle. I even got up to the Mutoid Man, I love watching him explode. Between these two games, I think I would much rather play the Commodore game. It just looks and sounds and plays better in my opinion. Our next game is Spy Hunter, and it's about a guy cruising around in his little red and white Corvette, and you know, he's just driving along the road minding his own business when suddenly out of the blue, these blue spy agents just start attacking him. And the Nintendo game is very similar to the arcade. It looks just like the arcade. And it plays similar to the arcade, but of course you don't have the steering controller. You have to use the joypad, which is never a good thing in driving games. You also have that wide variety of weapons to choose from, like smoke screens and oil slicks and missiles and things like that. Next, let's take a look at the Commodore 64 version of the game, and I really like the music in this one. The Peter Gunn theme is a little bit more pronounced here. Also, the sound effects are very good too. Control is also nice and smooth, and I wasn't sliding all over the road too bad, which is always a good thing. So which game did I like better? Well, you know, I really wish there was a combination between these two games because the music and sounds I feel are better on the Commodore, but the graphics are better on the Nintendo. So could we somehow merge these two games together? That would be great. But I feel like the Nintendo game is closer to the arcade in looks and feel. Next, let's talk about the classic game Super Mario Bros. I mean, what can you say about Super Mario Bros.? It hasn't been said a million times before. It's just one of those perfect Nintendo games that just cannot be replicated. The sounds and music are just absolutely perfect, not to mention timeless. But really, I think it's the control that makes the game special. I mean, Mario just moves absolutely perfectly, doesn't he? I never felt that the graphics were all that special. They're kind of plain, but, you know, they do the job. So how can Commodore possibly compete with Super Mario Bros.? Well, how about a game called the Great Giana Sisters, which is in no way at all related to Mario Bros. In this game, you're not playing as Mario, you're playing as Giana, and instead of coins, you have diamonds, and instead of mushrooms, you have spirals. So obviously, this is nothing at all like Mario Brothers. You still have to jump on the enemies' heads to smash them, though. The music and sound effects are a little annoying, honestly. They definitely tried super hard with the sounds, that's for sure. But all kidding aside, Great Giana Sisters is a great game for the Commodore 64. Alright, now I would be remiss if I didn't showcase the absolutely amazing Commodore 64 homebrew game of Super Mario Bros. Check this out! The graphics took a little bit of a hit, but overall, I mean, it looks very similar to the Nintendo game. It also plays very similar to the Nintendo game. The one downside is that you have to push up in order to jump, which can be a little tricky, but, you know, I got used to it. Another amazing aspect of this game is the sounds and music, which I dare say is absolutely identical to the Nintendo game. If you were to close your eyes, you wouldn't be able to tell which one was which. The only real downside of the game is that if you get 2 or more enemies on the screen, the game slows down really badly. But come on, you gotta give this homebrew programmer credit for creating such an amazing conversion of Super Mario Bros. So which one of these 3 games would I rather play? Well, I mean, how can you not go with the original Super Mario Bros. For the Nintendo Entertainment System? It's one of the greatest games of all time. Next we have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the original game, not the arcade game. And in this game you play as all 4 turtles on a quest to recover your stolen pizza. I mean, who cares about April? We need pizza here. I think the graphics in the game are really good. Also, the music and controls are pretty good too. And I like how each turtle is significantly different. It's most noticeable with Donatello because he has that really long bow staff, and it makes it a lot easier to attack enemies with it. Alright, surprisingly enough, there was a Commodore 64 version of this game too. And as you can see, it looks very similar to the Nintendo game, but the colors are not quite as vibrant, and the graphics are not quite as detailed. Also, the controls are tricky because, again, you have to push up in order to jump. The music and sounds, I don't know, they just don't feel right. I don't know, they just seem to be lacking something. I'm not sure what. Maybe it's the percussion. Also, this game has long loading times in between stages. But I guess that's just a feature of being a Commodore 64 owner. So which game would I rather play? Well, honestly, I think I'd rather play the arcade game. I've never been that much of a fan of the original Turtles game, but between the two, I mean, I think the Nintendo game is better. Alright, there you go. 28 games that appeared on the Nintendo and Commodore 64. Now, naturally, most of these were arcade-style games, but surely there are games that are unique to each system that I wasn't able to feature. I'll let you tell me about those games down in the comments. With that said, thank you for watching, take care, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.